Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 152 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Early Success, an interview with Rachel Barnes. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
So, Matt, I really enjoyed this episode of our podcast because we captured someone who's at the early stages of her Lyme disease healing journey, and she's doing really well. So she's finished phase one and she's finished the antibiotic stage of her journey. And now she's moving to the healing stage of her journey, where she's now going to try to rebuild her immune system so she can defeat her Lyme disease.
And Rachel was such a strong Lyme patient. She talks about getting bit almost a decade ago and then being told by her doctors that she's just hormonal by her primary care doctor. She was told that she's just fine when she was in a wheelchair and couldn't walk, but she continued to fight for her health. She finally found an article about Lyme disease and chronic Lyme and went to a Lyme literate doctor where she tested positive for Lyme disease, Bartonella, and Babesia. She's been treating for about the last year, and as you noted, has had major success early on in this treatment journey.
Hey, Rachel Barnes, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rich. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
And we're excited to have you for a lot of different reasons, Rachel. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't start out by giving a shout out to one of my favorite people in the world, Jackie Shea. So tell us about your relationship with Jackie Shea.
I 100% agree. We should give endless accolades to Jackie. So I actually heard Jackie on another podcast. I'm blanking on the name, but I just said, this sounds like someone I can really relate to and someone I really feel like could help me. And I just had this calling to reach out to her. So I did. And that was like spring of last year. So I've been doing coaching sessions with her. This is my second round, and she's just been so helpful. She's been, I don't know what I would have done without her. So personally, it's something that I will forever appreciate for the rest of my life.
So I have to share our Jackie Shea story before we begin your journey. And that is, we first started this podcast. We were doing some research. I listened to Jackie Shea's podcast, and I called her and asked her if she would agree to be on our podcast, thinking she'd say no, because we didn't know what we were doing, and we didn't have any following. And she was not only generous enough to join us on the podcast and gave us this brilliant podcast that resulted in me crying during the podcast, but she also was really generous with sharing with us how to put together a podcast. So she was just an unbelievably generous mentor to us as podcasters. So now that we're 80,000 downloads in, we have to tip our hat to Jackie and all of the help that she's offered to us, as an early mentor. So shout out to Jackie Shea. Everyone, we love Jackie, and we strongly urge everyone to listen to the story that Rachel is going to share and consider working with Jackie Shea. So, Rachel, let's talk about you. Where are you from?
So this is an interesting question. I never know how to respond because I feel like my background is half and half. But so originally, I am from Florida. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, and then grew up in St. Augustine, Florida, which is beautiful if you've never been there. And then when I was about 10 or 11, we moved up to Maryland. And I was like, what is Maryland? And what is this cold white stuff falling from the sky? And so moved there and finished kind of the second half of my childhood in this area. So
talk to us about your health during your childhood. Were you a healthy kid? Were you a sickly kid? What was your health like during your childhood?
So truly, I just had an amazing childhood, wonderful family, wonderful parents. I think I was a pretty healthy, happy kid, always outside playing, also inside playing Barbies and things like that. But, I would not call myself a sickly kid. I will say I was a premature baby. So I often wonder, and funny you should talk about Jackie, but we were talking about this, as that could have potentially been a very early trauma for me. Just being premature. I was born early, and I was in that little, baby incubator for a few weeks. And my dad always tells a story about he went to visit me, and my little hand just bit right on his thumb, and he would go every day. And then my mom would have to, she of course had a C-section. So my aunt was driving her up there to see me. And so that, I think, I guess that was a rough point for me starting out. But after that, I would say I was a healthy kid. I definitely got sick. I remember getting the chicken pox very vividly. I remember getting, flus and viruses and strep throat and all the things that the kids get. But, other than that, I was a healthy, happy kid.
So what were your dreams? What did you envision yourself doing when you grew up, when you were a child, both in Florida and in Maryland?
So I do recall I wrote in a yearbook in elementary school in Florida that I wanted to be, I think one was I wanted to be a vet, which that quickly changed, but I did love, little animals at that point, and I thought that's what I wanted to do. I think another one I wanted to be a author and illustrator for children's books, which that kind of plays into where I am now. I love writing. I've always loved writing. Very creative, like definitely not the math science person here. All art and which plays into now where I'm a designer. That's my profession, and so always been very creative. But I just normal dreams. I wanted to have a job and a career that I love and travel and spend time with friends and family. Just normal things that most people want, I guess.
So, as a child in Florida and then a child in Maryland, I'm assuming you had a good educational experience. You're clearly a very smart and articulate young lady. During this educational experience that you had prior to going to college, what did you know about ticks and Lyme disease?
It's funny you should ask that because my cousin and I were talking about this the other day. I still have a lot of family in Florida, so her yard. So she actually lives next to where, like, we grew up living next to each other. So she's kind of like a sister to me. But we were talking about this, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm finding so many ticks on my kids in the yard, and it's crazy." And of course, I'm going through this journey, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you better get your daughter tested for Lyme and all this stuff." But I was talking to my parents too. Like, it's so funny. I never remember finding a tick on myself ever, not once in Florida or in Maryland. And it wasn't a thing. We were never taught to check for ticks. Not really. I mean, it was like I knew what a tick was, but I never really thought more than that. It was funny in Florida. There were plenty of other things, like snakes and poisonous snakes, so we were taught to look for things like that. And but yeah, I mean, all the years growing up, I didn't know much about it. I had heard of Lyme disease. I guess I never knew how serious it was, or and I did not know how tiny ticks could be.
So let's unbox this a little bit. So as a child in Florida, either in school or somehow through some cultural information, you knew there were certain experiences in nature that you should avoid. For example,
Yes.
for example, snakes. And you took steps to avoid coming in contact with snakes, but you are not in your health classes or in any other educational experiences that you had in Florida taught anything about ticks or tick diseases.
Not that I recall. Nope.
So let's talk about your educational experience in Maryland. When you went to school in Maryland, was there any conversation about ticks or Lyme disease? Because we have interviewed many people from Maryland who have had contact with ticks and are suffering from Lyme disease.
No, again, I don't remember. So in middle school, we went to something called outdoor school, which was, you go away from home for a week and you stay in a cabin with, other, girls or boys your age, and you do hikes and nature walks and learn about, and I truly do not remember them ever saying that, and maybe I'm just not remembering. But no, I don't remember even that week checking myself for ticks when we were out in the woods all day long, so it's kind of ironic.
So tell us, so we can have a context here. When did you first start to show the symptoms of what you now know to be Lyme disease?
I wish I knew. I do know that in like high school and college, like I got strep quite a few times, or at least what I assumed was strep and sore throats. But, I really don't think I started feeling bad enough to where it was interfering with my life until, a few years ago. I will say, I don't remember obviously when I got bitten. I don't remember if it was, you know, a specific incident because I never found a tick. I never saw a bullseye rash. I will say 10-ish years ago, I had this weird summer, spring flu. I remember it very vividly, and it went away. And then a few months later, I did have some knee pain, and I remember going to the doctor. So I had been a runner, a long distance runner in like high school, and I still kind of ran in my 20s and here and there. And my orthopedic specialist said, "Oh, you have runner's knee." I'm like, okay. And so it went away. Like it would kind of come on and off, but it wasn't interfering really with my life. There were a couple weeks where I couldn't walk very well, and then that kind of went away. So up until I would say like 4 to 5 years ago, I thought I was fine. I do always think that I'm more tired than other people, and I don't know if that had something to do with it, you know, and maybe I did get bitten then, and maybe it's been, you know, in me this whole time and I didn't know. But 4 to 5 years ago, one day I just got this just horrific migraine out of nowhere. And I had never in my life gotten a migraine. I didn't know it was happening to me. I thought I was dying of a brain tumor, to be honest. I was sitting at my desk at work, and all of a sudden it was like I couldn't see out of my left eye. I was nauseous. I had a splitting headache on the left side of my head. And so one of my coworkers had taken me to CVS to get some like Excedrin migraine. I couldn't drive. I was, you know, just a mess. And then I went home for 3 days, and I called my friend, who's my best friend, who's a nurse, and asked her, and she's like, "Yeah, it sounds like you're having a migraine." Well, after like 3 days, it didn't go away. It was still there. And so I ended up going to my primary care physician, and I was like, "Listen, like, I really think I need to get an MRI. Like, I think I have a brain tumor or something." And she was not the most helpful. She basically was like, "Look, you have a migraine. People get migraines, you know, get over it," kind of thing. She did prescribe me some, like a triptan medication, and it did help. And then after a couple of days, it went away. But it kept happening, and, you know, kept coming back, and they kept getting worse. And so, you know, that kind of led into like, I really think that was like the first thing that started the decline in my health was these headaches.
So, Rich, I want to walk back to the knee pain and the summer flu that you had, because it sounds like you did treat with doctors, and it sounds like it was a bad enough flu that you would remember it for some reason. So let's talk about that. So why do you remember this summer flu as opposed to any other illness that you ever had at any time?
Well, I remember thinking it was odd because I'm like, who gets, you know, this, like, I don't know if it was like May or June, you know, that time of year. And I was like, this is unusual. And I remember it vividly because I was going to a concert, and I was so upset because it just hit me like, you know, a Mack truck out of nowhere, and I couldn't get up, and I had a really bad fever, and I had chills, and, you know, it was for like a couple days, but I, you know, like a trooper, popped some Dayquil and went. But I remember afterwards, I was just like, I was done. I mean, I couldn't get up, but I remember it because I think it tied to that event.
So how old were you at that time?
Oh gosh, probably around like 26, 27.
So you had already graduated from college. Were you working? Where were you in your life at that time?
Yes, I was working. I was working as a designer at a firm in DC. I was actually living in North Bethesda at the time.
Other than interfering with your enjoyment that you thought you would have at this concert, did that summer flu have any other impact on you or your life?
Nope. I mean, I think it was gone in like 2 or 3 days.
So now let's talk about the knee pain you started to feel and you seeking out doctors. You said you were a runner at that time.
Yeah.
What was the knee pain like, and why was it so bad that you decided to treat with a doctor?
So I had like, you know, shin splints and things like that from running cross country. I won't say I was a really good runner, but I ran. But I'm thinking that week. So I remember I had gone to the gym and I did, a combo of kind of like walking and running uphill on the treadmill. And like the next day, I legitimately couldn't walk. Like one of my knees just, I couldn't walk on it. And so, I remember one of my friends, I think, drove me there, and I just made an appointment with this. Oh, I will say, I knew this orthopedist. He was very close to my apartment. I knew him because I had broken my wrist snowboarding a few years ago, and he had fixed me. And amazing doctor. And so I was like, okay, I'll go see him. And got it x-rayed. He looked at it and he's like, yeah, I think you have runner's knee, like do these stretches and whatever, and it should go away. And it was kind of off and on. Like I remember going on vacations and I would be very diligent about doing my exercises, but it really only got bad to the point where I couldn't really walk. I think that time.
Now, did that doctor ever suggest to you that you should treat with another doctor and perhaps be evaluated for something other than runner's knee?
No.
How did your symptoms progress from that point until the time where you started to have your migraines? Did you have any other symptomology that was impacting your health in any way?
I mean, not that I can really recall. Again, I think I was busy. I mean, I was a very busy person. I was, always out with friends, working hard, working late at the firm. I would do exercise classes. I remember doing a lot of yoga, occasional running, just an active, normal person. I will say I just always have felt tired. Like I remember just always being like, man, like whatever time of day it is, I just feel like I can chill out and watch a movie and sleep. So I don't know if that was part of it. Definitely some emotional, some anxiety, some ups and downs with moods. And so I don't know if I can attribute that to Lyme or not. It's again, things that could or could not be Lyme.
So let's talk about your fatigue. What was the fatigue like, and why did you believe that the fatigue was something that was just normal for a busy gal?
I think just because I was so active and I really would push myself. I mean, there were nights that, we would work late, and then, or whatever, normal things, go out and have a few drinks and hang out with friends. And okay, maybe I just had a couple too many glasses of wine. I'm just tired, but I think, people too would just say that, like, oh, it's normal. You work so hard, like you're tired.
All right, so now let's get to the point where you're now about 4 or 5 years ago. You're living this very busy life. So let's talk about your work life. Let's talk about your personal life. And is there anything going on in your life that you think could have caused you to suppress your immune system, or could have caused a suppression of your immune system to now let this Lyme disease take off?
So I can't really pinpoint anything specific. I think there were some relationship things. I had, gone through a breakup around that time, which was difficult for me. So I guess that could have attributed. Working hard, I switched jobs about 7 years ago, and so that was maybe around the time where I was still new at that job, and it was stressful. I mean, work is always stressful, it's just something you can't really get away from. So of course, there were fluctuations in that. But other than that, I mean, I really can't, it wasn't like there was a death in the family or a car accident or anything like that. I would say it was more emotional things and ups and downs.
But your emotions, of course, are a very important part of immune health, and stress is a very important part of immune health. And we've had many guests on this podcast, Rachel, who have gone through a life change like a breakup that has ultimately been an immune suppressing event or an immune disrupting event that now results in this opportunistic disease taking off. So I wouldn't be so I wouldn't be so generous with myself about saying, hey, I didn't have someone die in my family, but we mourn differently and stress presents differently in each of us. And that's one of the reasons why we ask our folks when we're going through these stories to focus on what was going on in their lives around the time when these events are taking off. And in many cases, we will attribute something to being an emotional illness or an emotional response, when in fact it's now a physiological response that's triggered by an immune disrupting event.
Right.
So,
and well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it's funny you say that, because I mean, of course, I think most people who get chronically ill like this, like I retraced my life and the steps and everything so many times in my head, thinking, did something happen? Where could I have gotten bitten? Like, when was this moment that my life changed forever? And, in those past years around when that started, yeah, I clearly live in an endemic area. It could have been, walking outside. But I also had gone camping in Pennsylvania. I went to Maine to, with some friends, and, was in the woods, was kayaking, those things. So there's just, I remember thinking I was at another concert, and I was like, oh my gosh, we sat on the lawn, like maybe I got bitten then. That was like right around the time, that was like 2 weeks before I got this migraine, so it's just so hard to know.
it is hard to know, and it could be that there were a combination of things that were happening, and you could have been reinfected. You could have been affected during your childhood. You could have been affected during your young adult life, and you're still a young adult, but at a younger stage in your adult life, and then you could have been reinfected, and a combination of events, including immune disrupting events, could have put you in a position where your immune system was just not in a position where it could manage it. And because you've been to so many different tick endemic communities, we have to invite you out to Long Island. We call Long Island the Lyme Belt, so you might as well visit it all, right, Rachel?
Well, it's funny you say. So my mom grew up in East Meadow, and so yes, as a kid we visited Long Island, and my grandparents lived in Connecticut, so every year we were in. I mean, it's
seems to me you were bound to come in contact with ticks when you were in all of these different elements of the Lyme Belt. And unfortunately, during your childhood and during your health educational experience, you didn't receive the training you needed or the information you needed to remain healthy. And I think it's just ironic. Again, I'll just make this observation before I let Matt begin his questions. I think it's ironic that you were trained on how to avoid snakes, which I think we're very unlikely to come in contact with, but you were certainly not trained to protect yourself from ticks, which you are very, very likely to come in contact with, certainly when you're spending a lot of time in the Lyme Belt and coming to Long Island and to Connecticut. So talk to us a little bit about how your symptoms began to develop now 4 or 5 years ago, and what impact this was now having on your life, meaning how is it interfering with your social life and how is it interfering with your professional life?
So from the headache starting, it just really continued to get worse. It was to the point where I was basically having migraines or that feeling more days than I wasn't. I remember my mom and I went on a trip. We like to take a mom-daughter trip, once a year, although that hasn't been happening lately. And we were on vacation, and I just remember like we were going to go to dinner, and I could barely function. I was like, and I was popping these migraine pills like candy, and they just kind of stopped working. And so, that was really how it started, but it was scary migraines. I was like, they call them complex migraines or, hemiplegic migraines. I think I'm saying that correctly, but it was like, can't see out of your eye. I was getting numbness and tingling on one side, like stroke symptoms, basically. It was really kind of terrifying. And so I went to another primary care, and again, she kind of she rolled her eyes at me, and I said, listen, I'm not asking anymore. I want a scan of my head. And if you're not going to give it to me, I'll go to some other doctor until they will, So it was around that time that I kind of had this, I consider it to be my first really like Lyme episode, where I was getting numbness and tingling like on my legs and arms, like peripheral. And then that headachy, migrainey feeling. The pills were not helping. I was nauseous. I was dizzy. I was exhausted. I was like, something is wrong. And I was waiting at that point to get into a neurologist. I did finally get my MRI of my, brain and neck, and it was totally normal. And, the doctor left me this message saying like, okay, it's normal. Like I told you it was going to be, kind of thing, like, very almost condescending. And I was like, all right, well, I'm still going to see a neurologist. So, and it was around that time that, those symptoms just started to get worse on and off. Like I remember walking in, I was in Walmart of all places, and I'm holding onto the shopping cart, and I was like, oh my gosh, like something is wrong. Like it was mainly the left side of my body at that point, but it was like just the whole left side was numb and just felt, weird, like wrong. Something was wrong. And then, so it was like this numbness, this tingling, this paresthesia, and then it would be off and on. And so I did go to a neurologist, and we talked, and he was very thorough. He did so many tests, everything was coming back normal. He was testing me, of course, for all the autoimmune MS, for lupus, for, whatever else I can't think of right now. And then he did, I was also having some really severe back pain, like lower back pain. So he basically did MRIs of like my whole body, and everything was normal. I mean, there was some like, a little bit of like disc stuff, which is just, from getting older, wear and tear, like being active, skiing, snowboarding, whatever, and then it was so ironic. He's like, okay, I think you're good to go. You're a normal, healthy girl. Go live your life. And they had also done this muscle testing with me, and nerve testing, where they stick these little, I forget what it's called, but, they stick these little things in your muscles in your legs and test they also did a sleep study, like an EEG, an EMG. I mean, so many tests. It was just crazy. Everything was normal. So then I'm leaving his office, and that week, I remember he's telling me that, and my right knee started hurting. And I'm like, okay. And so I remember being in his office, and he's telling me I'm healthy and I can move on, and he'll see me in like, 6 months for a follow-up. He had also switched my migraine medicine. And the next week, I couldn't walk. Like that knee just got worse. And I was like, okay. So at this point, I was very active doing reformer Pilates like 2-3 times a week. And that was really my main form of exercise, or like going for long walks or whatever. But I was obsessed with this class, and I just loved it. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I, tweaked something, whatever. Well, it got worse, and it moved into the other knee. So it was both knees. And I'm like, okay. So I went back to my orthopedist, and this was after about a month of just like resting and trying to stay off it, and it wasn't getting better, it was getting worse. I also noticed my legs were sort of this weird, like blotchy looking, just like reddish, color. Like it was just, clearly it was inflammation. I didn't know it at the time, but that's what was happening. And I was like, okay, like they just looked kind of like puffy and not right. I don't think anyone else would have noticed. But during this time, I'm trying to work, like I'm, as a project manager and a designer, like I'm trying to go to job sites, I'm trying to go to meetings, I'm having trouble just walking normally. And so I went to the orthopedist, and he again did x-rays and examined me, and he's like, okay, I think this is from your class. I think you've got some patellar tendonitis. I'm like, okay, in both legs? And he's like, yeah. Like, okay. So then I started physical therapy, and he also had given me some, like an anti-inflammatory, which did nothing, literally nothing. I mean, I was popping like Tylenol and ibuprofen, like, again, like candy, along with the migraine pills. And it wasn't even helping. Like it didn't even do anything. And so I was doing physical therapy, and it was just, I have to say this was one of the worst experiences of my life, because, and I love this physical therapist. He was amazing. He helped me with my wrist. And this whole time, I'm like, I think they just thought I was a huge baby, because I'm trying to do these exercises and I'm just sitting on the table sobbing, like it's just killing me. And I would sit in my car, like it hurt to drive. So, sorry, I get emotional just talking about it, but it was so awful. Like I looked fine on the outside, but I literally thought I was dying. And I'm like, what is wrong? Like it kept spreading and getting worse. Eventually it was in my feet and ankles. And so in the fall, this was after months of forcing myself to go, and it was just getting worse. I went back to see the doctor and he's like, all right, I think we just need to take a break. Why don't you just rest? So all I was doing was rest, ice, rest, ice, rest, ice. Like I could barely do anything socially. I was like, I remember being in the grocery store trying to push the shopping cart and like I couldn't carry my groceries, and it just got to the point where I was like, I would go to work and then I would basically sit at my desk all day and try not to get up as much as possible. Like I wouldn't drink anything so that I wouldn't have to walk to the bathroom down the hall. It just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So my whole body like just started to hurt, and I could tell by around like Thanksgiving. So basically like from May to like the end of the year, it just got to the point where I was like completely like debilitated. I was forcing myself to go out, but it was so painful to do anything. So that just kind of was the worst of it. And then I remember for Christmas that year, my brother was going to Florida, so we still have a lot of family in Florida, and I try to go every year to see everyone. And I remember calling him and just crying my eyes out. I'm like, Greg, I can't go, like there's no way. I can't walk in the airport. I can't walk that far. And so he's like, all right. So he booked my flight. He picked me up. He got me a wheelchair and wheeled me through the airport. And that was the only way I was able to go, And I was so embarrassed because I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I was walking with crutches, like, and even that hurt because I'm like, my arms hurt. Like, it was like, how do you walk with crutches when both of your legs are killing you, So I was doing that. And I remember in Florida, it was just, I was sitting on the couch with him and I was just crying. And I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I think like I might be dying. Like something's really wrong, And he just hugged me and he's like, we're going to figure it out. It's going to be okay. Like my brother was just, he was a lifesaver that trip. And so at that point I had emailed my physical therapist guy who has a doctorate in physical therapy. And he said, I think you should go see a rheumatologist. Like, let's do that. And maybe, and mind you, this is coming from him, not my doctor. This is coming from my PT guy. And so I did. I made an appointment. I couldn't get in until I think the end of January. So all during this time, I also went to see a functional medicine practitioner who one of my friends knew. I started seeing her in the fall. And so she had tweaked my diet, put me on some supplements, and she's like, yeah, something is clearly going on with you. I'm not sure what it is. Let me backtrack for a second. When I went back to see my neurologist, I had asked him to run a Lyme test as well as a rheumatoid arthritis test, which he did. He didn't complain. And I think it was the Western blot. Both came back normal and negative.
Let me stop you there for a second, Rachel. Why did you ask for a Lyme test at that point? And why didn't you ask for a Lyme test at any time before that?
So, of course, me, trying desperately to find out what was wrong with me, I was Googling like nonstop. I was up, it was probably most of my day was spent online, researching things. And I was up at like 3 a.m. one night because, of course, I couldn't sleep and trying to find out what was wrong. And I remember, I kept Googling like tendonitis and knee pain and all these other things. And like things about Lyme kept coming up, like joint pain. And I was like, okay. And so it was kind of in the back of my head. Well, I told my functional medicine practitioner this, and she was the first person who ever said to me, there's another test that is more accurate. And if things don't improve, we might want to go down that road.
But now, Rachel, you've gone to several doctors, and none of the doctors that you're treating with at this time have ever even talked to you about Lyme. But when you put your symptoms into Google, Lyme keeps coming up. So
Yeah.
talk to us about why you think perhaps Google was properly diagnosing you and the doctors you were treating weren't diagnosing you and properly. And one of the things I have to ask as part of this question is, do you think your gender played any role in their in the failure to properly diagnose you? Because you keep saying that people are essentially implying that you're a baby or you don't have a high pain threshold, or so unwrap all that for us.
I don't know, like, I guess a guy with these symptoms, I think they probably would take them more seriously because, I'm like, that's why I literally in the back of my head, I'm like, am I crazy? Or do these people just think I'm being dramatic? Am I being dramatic? No, I know that something is wrong with me. I know when my body doesn't feel normal, but do I think there was some of that? Maybe. I don't know if it was gender as much as they just thought I was a huge wimp. But that's, I guess, speculation. I don't know if I'll ever really know. I think maybe a little bit. I do think I got that some from my primary care. Like, she was like, okay, you're hormonal, you get migraines, just kind of deal with it, like everyone else.
But Rachel, when you scrape out the emotional piece of this, right, and you just have an algorithm reviewing the information you're putting in, the diagnosis keeps coming back Lyme way before you were finally diagnosed. But
Yeah.
when we bring in the emotion and we bring in the human component of doctors interfacing with you, no one even mentioned it to you. You had to
No.
demand the test.
No one mentioned it. My neurologist was not, opposed to me getting the test. Like, he didn't say anything at that point, but I think his attitude was kind of like, okay, I figured it was going to come back negative. So yeah, and I think what it is this is what happens, with Lyme, which, we've all learned, is that there's so many pieces to this puzzle and none of the doctors put them together. There's so many symptoms that could be something else or look like something else or present like something else. And it's like, I mean, what, it's like you have a problem with every part of your body. I mean, what's wrong with you? Oh, you're just being dramatic, or it's, maybe it's in your head. I do think, I remember the neurologist saying sometimes you have symptoms that don't have an explanation.
Let's talk about how your family and friends were reacting to Rachel's developing symptoms, which on some level you're even doubting whether or not you are sick. So how are you did share with us your brother was a bright light in this, but was everybody a bright light? Were there other family members who were thinking that perhaps you were dramatic and not really sick? And do you have any friends thinking that perhaps you were being dramatic and not sick?
So I think my family, like, so most of them are not here. And so I did a pretty good job of, like, I kind of kept it quiet-ish because I was trying to really figure out what was going on. And it wasn't really until the holidays came around where I was going to see them that it really, came out. Like, obviously I was telling my mom and my dad and my brother, but I didn't really, like, announce to my whole extended family that, like, I remember my aunt called me and she's like, oh my gosh, like, I didn't realize you were having so much trouble. Like, and she sent me a sweet card, but again, no one really knew what was going on until Christmas, when I was there on crutches,
Right. But Rachel, part of this journey is a psychological journey, right? Or an emotional journey. And, our own mind will undermine our plan to heal, right? We'll doubt ourselves. And then what happens is intimate people in our lives will sort of add to that and increase the doubt that we have. And other people that we come in contact with, whether they be coworkers or doctors or other people who we don't necessarily have an intimate relationship with, but are also impacting us. So talk to us about how all of those people in your life, whether they be colleagues, friends, family, were sort of contributing to the doubt that you had about whether or not you were sick or not.
Well, it was interesting at work because, again, I didn't know what to think. So I think, I don't know what most other people thought. I mean, people were trying to be nice and considerate and, like, do meetings for me or, like, just do a phone call or, I remember my boss was very sweet and she's like, I hope we figure out what's going on. But it was not, I don't think people really understood the pain that I was in. I do remember I I was in the bathroom one day and I was just crying, and this person from another floor who worked at another company, a tenant in our building, just said, are you okay? Like, can I help you? And I was like, I just don't know what's wrong with me. And I just like unleashed on her. I didn't even know her. I was sobbing, and I was like, because she's seen me going out of the bathroom with like barely being able to walk. And so I don't really think people were doubting me. I think they were probably as confused as I was about why all of a sudden this girl just couldn't walk. Like it was weird. But I will say, like, in the fall when it started to get really bad, like I would force myself to go to things with friends, and it was getting to the point where people were kind of like, okay, why are you avoiding doing things with us? Like, people were trying to be supportive, but again, they didn't really know what was going on. I did have one friend who flat out came to me and said, why don't you ever want to spend time with me anymore? Like, she was really angry and hurt. And I was like, I'm really sorry. It's not you, it's not that. I'm sick, like something's wrong. And, so it did kind of start to really get to that point. I was just continuing to force myself to go places and, just suffer through it. And then I would come home and just cry and not move from the couch for 2 days, so
Rachel, that's totally understandable that you don't know what's going on with you. You're trying to push through. Your friends are seeing that you're not your normal self anymore. And so much so where your neurologist is running a Lyme test thinking you don't have it because you're basically forcing him to.
Yeah.
And then it comes back negative and he's kind of saying, I told you so. And then thankfully you went to a functional medicine doctor who implemented some of these diet changes that probably helped you a little bit before your diagnosis, but then also brought to your attention that these Lyme tests aren't great and recommended, it sounds like, an IGeneX test to get some definitive testing for Lyme disease. So walk us through that piece of your journey.
So she's amazing. And I had heard about her through a friend, and I was confiding in my one friend about what was happening because she knew my functional medicine person and had kind of referred me to her because they were friends. And so Heather, this was the practitioner, she did, you had to have a really open mind. She did Reiki, she did body talk, she did acupuncture, which I'm terrified of needles and I cried the whole time, but she did that. And so she did a lot of blood work. We didn't really revisit the Lyme at that point, but it was kind of on the back burner. Like, she was like, I've never seen it present this way in someone. She was like, I'm not sure that that's what you have, but she did mention that there was another test. I don't think I knew the name. And then in between kind of seeing her and adjusting my diet, and reading things online. And so around Christmas, when I was in Florida, I remember like my feet and my ankles, like, were swollen and like so red, like it hurt to wear pants. I think that was nerve pain too. It hurt to put shoes on. Like, I didn't want anything touching my skin. And that
Rachel,
was getting really bad.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Rachel, but this is a really important topic that we don't hear enough about. And we've heard from people offline that your skin becomes so sensitive that you literally cannot wear pants. You literally cannot either yourself or have somebody else touch your skin lightly, gently, or even brush up against your skin. Is that what you were feeling?
Yes. Yep. And still to an extent, like, it's embarrassing to say, but just recently has it gotten to the point where I'm like even wearing pajama pants and without thinking about it. Like, it was to the point where I couldn't even touch my own legs.
So talk to us more now about your functional doctor. Is that the doctor who ultimately diagnosed you with Lyme disease, or did you have to pivot to several other doctors before getting your diagnosis?
Several others. She did not. She was the first to kind of go down that road and suggest that I, that we maybe look into that if the things that she was implementing weren't helping.
And did they help at all? The Reiki, the body talk, the acupuncture, a lot of these holistic approaches, because they may have helped the Lyme disease a little bit potentially.
I think a little bit. The diet, I think, made me feel a little better. But and the acupuncture was interesting. Like she would do it and the swelling and redness would kind of go away in my legs, but it would come back within like a day or two. So, I do think it helped. And I think that it really opened my eyes to some of the more natural and homeopathic options that are out there, but it was not ultimately what led me to my diagnosis.
Now, talk to us about that period between your functional doctor and your diagnosis. Did your symptoms develop any further? Were there any new symptoms? And what occurred during that time period before you finally found your final doctor and got your diagnosis?
Yeah, so I made the appointment with the rheumatologist, couldn't get in, so I was waiting for that. I was starting to get a lot of swelling. So like it was very scary. Like it was like 2 or 3 toes at a time would be extremely swollen and painful. And it would kind of like alternate with which foot, like my ankles too, very swollen and painful. Just pain everywhere. Like I remember having, the knees, of course, were always the worst, like that area, but I don't know that it was so much, it was joint pain, but it was more like it was in my tendons, like it was like tendon and muscle and nerve pain, like just to the point where my legs were just literally I could barely move, and so what I was doing during that time was just frantically still Googling, and I came across this article that this girl had written, and it was called, it said, chronic Lyme nearly ruined my life. I was 30 and in a wheelchair or something along those lines. And I'm like, oh my God, this is me. And so I read it and I was beside myself. I was sobbing. I was like, this is literally me. I mean, it was the same thing. Doctor after doctor kept telling her she had tendonitis. She couldn't walk anymore. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I honestly give a huge credit to me healing to Stephanie. It was Stephanie, hopefully I'm saying her name right, Eckelkamp. She's a writer. She writes for Mind Body Green. She's been amazing in my journey. I mean, I didn't reach out to her until later on after I figured out what was wrong, but I mean, I ultimately owe her my life in figuring out what was wrong with me, because that article online is what made me say, you know what? Screw it. I am going to make an appointment with a Lyme doctor. I don't care what anyone else says. I'm getting tested. And I went.
Rachel, what really makes me so proud about our guests during these interviews is that you were so sick and you saw so many specialists, yet you continued to research. You came up with Lyme. You were dismissed and kind of laughed at by your neurologist. Then your functional doctor really kind of put it on the back burner. You then found this article. You knew this is what you had. And then you went to a Lyme-related doctor to demand the testing to get the proper diagnosis that you knew you had after being so sick.
Yeah.
So walk us through what that was like when you went to this Lyme-related doctor and what testing they did and how it was different than all the testing you've had done before.
So I went and, it was the first doctor who really, I mean, I was probably in there for 3 to 4 hours. She listened to me, just every symptom, every story, every test. It was a refreshing experience to just have someone spend that much time with you and really listen. And I said, well, what do you think, is this Lyme? And she said, she said she had never seen it present exactly like this. And she said, it could be. So she, of course, ran, all the blood panels. I think I had 12 or 14 tubes of blood taken that day. I was not a very happy person because I do not enjoy needles. But she did the IGeneX test. She ran, labs for every. And the other very interesting thing is this whole time there was nothing abnormal about any of my blood work, really, other than the Lyme eventually, but really nothing was off. None of the inflammation markers were up. None of the CBC was abnormal. It was, I think I was a little low on, like, I don't iodine or something random. Like it wasn't anything that was like, whoa, this girl's sick, her blood work is off. And so she also ran an IGeneX test for Bartonella because of some of my symptoms. So it was a very different experience. It was almost like, okay, I found my people. Like they're not saying I'm crazy, you know. And of course, it came back positive. Like all the other blood work came back, and we were waiting on IGeneX. And I remember sitting at my desk at work, and I got an email from them, and it said, your results have come back significant for active Lyme disease. And I just, you know, I was hysterical. I was at my desk at work. I remember just, oh my God, like, thank God, like I finally know what's wrong with me, you know.
So Rachel, what friction was there that caused you to wait so long to see a Lyme specialist? You were doing your Google work and Google was telling you had Lyme disease, yet you went to many other doctors before you went to a Lyme specialist. What was the friction, or what limitations caused you to wait as long as you did?
So I think it was, you know, most other people kind of dismiss it. And I was kind of like, okay, well, if they don't think I have it, then I don't. I took a Lyme test and it's negative. I didn't know at that point that the tests are 50% accurate or worse. You know, I had no idea. I was like, well, why would it come back negative if I had it, you know? And so the rheumatologist ran, you know, he did x-rays of everything. And, you know, it was all normal. Like, and I told him, I said, well, I'm waiting on the IGeneX test. And he was the worst. He laughed me off and he said, you don't have Lyme disease. I've seen Lyme disease. And I said, okay, well, I still want to wait and see, you know, maybe I do. And I said, well, what do you think is wrong with me? And he said, I don't know, I'm kind of baffled. Why don't you come back in 3 months? We'll see if it gets worse. I'm like, because I was thinking like I had, you know, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, you know, because of the tendon pain and the joint swelling in my toes. And, you know, I was fully prepared for all of these things. I was, you know, like, that's what I was expecting. But he definitely laughed me off. I called him when I got my positive result, and he actually made it worse and said, well, IGeneX is not something we believe in, or something along those lines. And I said, well, it's not just IGeneX, my CDC test is positive too. And he, you know, he didn't really want to hear that. So I just decided I'm not going to go see him again. And same thing with the neurologist. I was excited. I called him and made an appointment for a Zoom, and I showed him my results, and he was like, it basically was like a switch to a different person. Like the doctor I had known and who was caring and understanding and who I had trusted all this time was like a different doctor. He basically shut down and said that he didn't really believe in Lyme.
And Rachel, that's not uncommon, unfortunately. There are many doctors who don't believe in Lyme because that's what they were taught. And in your case, it sounds like you were eventually diagnosed with Lyme disease, Bartonella, and Babesia. But understanding that even the best labs in the world are still not perfect, it sounds like you had to use IGeneX for your Lyme diagnosis, Galaxy Labs for your Bartonella diagnosis, and LabCorp for your Babesia diagnosis. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the Babesia came back negative, but I'm still not convinced that I don't have it, and I may explore that further. My Lyme doctor now, who's actually my third Lyme doctor, and he's wonderful. He doesn't think I clinically have the symptoms, but we're not ruling it out. But yes, I did get tested with LabCorp. It came back negative, and he said, well, for what it's worth, it's negative, but that's not a very accurate test. But yes, Galaxy for Bartonella, which for the first 6 months of treatment, I didn't know that I had Bartonella because even the IGeneX came back negative. It was so elusive. So that was a huge, I think, hurdle in my healing journey so far, because I was not being treated for the Bart.
So let's talk about what this Lyme later doctor did to treat you once you had a positive Lyme test from IGeneX.
So she put me on, so this Lyme doctor group, they are, I won't say Horowitz totally, but they're a combination, I would say, of natural and like herbal and antibiotics. So, and they're, you know, my doctor now, he's wonderful and he's extremely open to kind of everything, but they also have a hyperbaric oxygen chamber there and things like that. but she did start me on conventional antibiotics. I popped some doxycycline thinking, oh, cool, I'll be better in a month or two, having no idea what was in store for me. I immediately threw that up within like 20 minutes. It was horrible. And I felt sick for like the next 6 hours. So I think I was allergic to doxy. But she then put me on Minocin, minocycline, for a few months, and then Biocidin and some supplements. So that was like the first thing. And then we kind of tweaked it. She added in azithromycin, which was brutal for the stomach. So I was pulsing antibiotics, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. And then also like doing some herbal supplements. She added, not sure how to say this, it's Baluch. It's like this earthworm thing that's supposed to help with circulation, because I kept telling her, I'm like, my legs are so red, and like, you know, I can't stand for more than a couple of minutes. So, but anyway, so I did antibiotics and this sort of regimen. I also at one point switched to clarithromycin as opposed to azithromycin, just because my poor stomach couldn't handle it anymore. And so, you know, I did notice some improvement, but, you know, after like 10 months of antibiotics, I just recently, like 2 months ago, made the decision that I don't want to do them anymore. I don't think it's, you know, I'm kind of now moving towards the herbals and some other natural things to treat. And within that time, I also found out I have Candida, which I'm sure is from the antibiotics. I did some further testing with a second Lyme doctor, which I will give him a lot of credit because he discovered a lot of things. He was like, you for sure have Bartonella. I don't care what the tests say, you have it. Even though Galaxy did eventually come back with that. The Candida, I also did the mycotoxin and oat test, organic acid test. So the mycotoxins were pretty off the charts in some areas. So there was mold, mycotoxins. This doctor also said he thinks I have mast cell activation due to the Lyme. Oh, I forgot that nice symptom. So for like a year or two, I was getting rashes all over my body that no one could quite figure out. And it did turn out I had a gold allergy. So that was part of it, which may have been triggered by the Lyme because I never had that before. But those eventually started to go away. When I was treating, they kind of came back off and on. So I don't know if it was a combo of mast cell, some other things. So that was another layer.
And Rachel, all those things you just described, we hear often that people get as a result of Lyme disease. They sort of go hand in hand in many cases. So you decided to treat for 10 months with antibiotics and in parallel using herbs and supplements and things like Biocidin to kill off the biofilm. And then you decided to go off of the antibiotics and go strictly on a holistic herbal route. So talk to us about how your health was at that 10-month mark when you went from antibiotics to solely herbals.
So I definitely was, you know, it's better than it was like when I first started, but like throughout the first 10 months, like the herxing was just, I mean, there were days where I was like, I'm going to die. I'm never going to make it out of this. I mean, I can't even explain the awful. I don't know if you guys got herxing, but horrific. So my kind of where I was in December and you know, I think now I'm doing a little bit better. It's continuing to progress, but in December I was still, you know, there were some days where I was seeing a little bit of glimpses of better and, you know, but I'm still basically like, I don't leave my house very often. You know, it's very difficult for me to do anything. So I've been extremely fortunate to keep my job and work from home this entire time. I'm so grateful to my team for being supportive and letting me do that. But my symptoms in December, I just, you know, I talked to my doctor and I was like, he's like, I don't know. I just think it's too much for you. Like you're too toxic. We just need to, let's take a break from the antibiotics. And immediately after getting off them, I felt better in a lot of ways. I have this terrified, you know, just thing in the back of my head that everything's going to come back now that I'm off antibiotics. But we added in some more herbals, and I'm doing a lot of detox. I have an infrared sauna blanket that I'm using. I'm doing Epsom salt baths. I'm dry brushing. My diet is very strict. I'm on a lot of supplements. A multivitamin with like resveratrol and NAC, and occasionally I'll do some glutathione, although that seems to be a little bit too much for me. I'm on a binder for the toxins and the mold. I've currently added nystatin for the candida, and actually found out that it also kills persister cells of all the things. So doing that, and I think at this point, the next steps are just going to be to kind of layer in more herbs and just, go that route, because I don't know, I've been watching a lot of like Dr. Rawls and reading things like that. And I'm just feeling called to that being the next steps in my journey, because I don't want to put any more poison in my body,
Rachel,
So-
there's a time and place for antibiotics, and it sounds like the route you have gone has been the route that many of our other guests have used to get to a successful outcome. You used antibiotics and herbals and supplements for a period of time. Then you stopped, and you mentioned you had this fear of sort of getting sick again or worse again once you went off the antibiotics, but you continued on with your herbals and your supplements and your detox protocol that you just described. And you're clearly still doing well, because you just did a great job explaining everything on this podcast, and you're very did a great job at explaining everything you've done. So with that being said, how would you assess your health today? What would you say your health is at today compared to when you were really at your lowest?
It's like I said, I still do not consider myself having any sort of a normal life. There's glimpses of it and there's hope. But I'm doing so much better than I was a year ago. So I'm so grateful for that. And I hope it'll just continue to get better. But we're not there yet.
So, Rachel, one of the things that we've talked about with many of our guests is that a Lyme journey is both a journey of achievement and a journey of transformation. And you've made some gains and you've begun to achieve some level of success with your health. Talk to us about how Lyme is changing you and helping you to learn more about yourself and learn more about your gifts. What are the beautiful elements that you're starting to see revealed to you about this journey?
So I think the biggest thing is just I will never take my life and my health for granted ever again. I guess you don't appreciate what you have until you don't have it. I mean, being bedridden and housebound for almost 2 years is just something that I never thought I would go through. And, it's like the moments that I'm feeling better, I realize that if I can just get it back, how much more I will appreciate life and how beautiful every moment is. My friendships mean so much to me. And just, it makes me want to just reach out to everyone in my life and let them know how much I love them and how special they are to me, and just not take anything for granted. There are some friends that just haven't really understood or haven't tried to reach out, and, but it's working with Jackie, I've kind of been, you really look at the deepest, darkest parts of yourself and try to grow and change from there and transform into this, butterfly of yourself, so to speak. It's been a really challenging process to kind of heal and work on healing and take every day just like one step at a time. Jackie says I have a huge problem with future tripping. But what I see for my future is I just want to help people now. I want to take my journey and do something to help people. And I think this is the first step with you guys today.
So talk to us about how social media has helped you to first find a health coach, somebody who has had a Lyme disease journey, and what role that's played, and how social media has helped you to recognize that you're not alone and that your experience is one that many other people are going through, and how that's been helpful to you.
So I think, your podcast and many others, and again, just on Instagram, I'm not huge into, I'm not all over Facebook or anything, but listening to people's stories and what they're going through, and like, you know, on days that are really bad, like I'll go back and read Jackie's blogs about her darkest days, and it's like, okay, she was there, she got out of this, you know. It helps you when you're in those dark moments. But yeah, you know, social media on Instagram, I would say I've followed a few groups and a few people, and you know, it really helps you to just know, like you said, that you're not alone. There are other people going through who understand this, because, you know, unless you go through Lyme, I don't think you can truly understand it. You know, I'm sure a lot of chronic illnesses are like this, but it's just been something that it's hard to even explain, you know. So the handful of people that I really follow on social media, and the friends, you know, I have another friend who I know through work who's going through it too, and we just text a few times a week, and just having that there, you know, and the people in your life who listen to you, and, you know, just listen to you cry, or listen to you when you're having a bad day, or rejoice in your moments where you know, put pants on today. You know, it's just I feel so loved by so many people in my life, and I feel, you know, it sounds crazy to say this, but I feel the love from these people I'm seeing on social media that are just people like me going through this, you know.
So let's talk a little bit about health coaching. I can tell you that before we started this podcast, I never heard of a health coach. As East Coasters, this is not something that we typically see. And I will also have to confess that when I first started hearing about health coaches, I kind of raised my brow, like, you know, why would we want a health coach, and what would they do for us? Talk to us about what the analysis was for you, and why you ultimately settled on the brilliant Jackie Shea.
So, like I said, I heard her on another podcast. I think it was with Cindy Kennedy, if I'm remembering correctly her name. And I just said, man, like, I can really relate to this girl, you know, like she is, I just felt like she's someone like me who has been through this and continues to go through this. And so then I went on her website, and I was reading things, and I was like, you know what, I just knew, you know, it's like, I really have learned in this process, and even more so with Jackie, like, to trust my own intuition, because if I hadn't, I still wouldn't know what's wrong with me. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be talking to Jackie. If I hadn't, I wouldn't be talking to you guys today. So I just, you know, it's like learning to trust yourself when so many others in the world doubt you. But Jackie, to find her, I didn't really look at any others, to be honest. I just knew she was the one I wanted to talk to. And you know, it's a brutal process of really uncovering yourself, and you know, the days when you're just really dark and you're having a pity party, and she's like, okay, I hear you, let's have that pity party, and then get over it, and let's move on and do something productive. You know, like, sometimes you need that, like, and sometimes you get it from people in your life, you know, people who love you, that are saying things that you take initially as super hurtful, but then you're like, you know what, they're right, and they love me, and they're only saying this because they love me.
Well, and, you know, and that's part of what a coach does for you, right? I mean, one of the think the most virtuous elements of having a health coach is you have to build a team of people around you who will help you through the physical and emotional elements of your journey, and having a coach to help you manage that team and build that team is important. But I think even more importantly, having a coach push you in ways that you're not going to push yourself, and in ways that your family either shouldn't or couldn't push you, is a really important element of having a coach. And having a health coach who has a Lyme disease, like Jackie Shea, can do it in a way that I think no one else could, at least for someone in the Lyme community.
Yes, I agree.
So let me take you to the final question that we always ask our guests. And let's say, God forbid, your brother, who was such a wonderful person on your journey, came walking into your room right after you finished the podcast, and he had a tick biting him on his leg. What would you recommend that he do so he wouldn't have to go on a chronic Lyme disease journey the way you have?
So what I didn't know, even, you know, once I learned more about Lyme, is that you really should save the tick and try to get it tested. We've learned that, and actually through my journey, there have been some people in my life that have gotten bitten, and I, you know, freaked out. But I think definitely get the tick tested. And I would say, if I've learned anything, it seems that if antibiotics ever have a place in time, it's immediately after you get bitten, but that still may not stop you from getting sick. So I would tell them to find a Lyme literate doctor and go immediately. Don't even bother going to your standard, primary care, because it's typically not going to get you anywhere. And then, I'm really a big fan of the herbs now. Like, I think there are a lot of things that you can start taking to boost your immune system and try to head it off before it becomes this chronic, awful thing that it takes years to get out of.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Rachel Barnes. To our listeners, we have a call to action. If you'd like to learn more about Rachel Barnes and her Lyme disease journey, please visit our Instagram page at Rachel Barnes 2219. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of our post. Third, we here at Tick Bootcamp have created a Tick Bite Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been provided to us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at www.tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or improvements you would like to share with us. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Podcast, or Spotify to get our automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. And finally, please take a minute to leave us an honest review and rating on iTunes or on our website. Thank you, as always, for listening.